So welcome to Critical Connections, where we are working to enhance and what else? Expand critical writing in ceramics. I say it so often, but anyway. And our guest today is Rick Newby, a writer and editor, most recently from Montana, but now from California. And I sent everyone the his email or his website address, so you all should have had the opportunity to catch up on him. And I have set it up, Rick, so that you can share your screen if you wish. If you wish just to talk, take it away.
Okay. I'll just be talking today. Uh,
Okay.
thanks. Yes, well, I so appreciate being able to share a little bit about my ceramics writing work with all of you distinguished folks. Um, I know all of you at least by reputation, and it's wonderful to see you. Thank you for being here. I wanted to thank Nancy Service, who I believe suggested that I be on the
Uh-huh.
on with you. And I think that the occasion was the publication last year of my new book, A Regionalism That Travels, Writings on Mostly Montana Arts. Uh, and this
Oh,
is kind of shocking, 1975 to 2022. So I guess I've been doing all kinds of writing for many years. Now that I'm in my 70s, it's it piles up. This is a very thick book. It's 460 pages,
wow.
and about a third of it is devoted to ceramic arts. So, uh, and that includes, well, a couple of things. I think that I can perhaps um, say something a little unique in that so much of my work has been, as the title indicates, about place and kind of what Lucy Lepard calls the lure of the local. And of course, I always trying to kind of uh, give a little nuance to what is the local. And the Bray in particular um, has really complexified that for me and made my life incredibly more rich. And so, as some of you may know, I co-wrote the essay on the origins of the Bray for the 2001 exhibition and conference for the Bray on its 50th anniversary. And so, in a sense, that really brought me deeply into the history of ceramics, both in Montana, but also in the US, because these figures who started it were so important to all of us. And, my writing career about ceramics started in the early 90s, actually. That was in 2001. Um, I had an opportunity, I had befriended a number of clay artists at the Bray, just living in Helena as a young poet. That's my training. And so I was just fascinated and delighted to encounter all these great artists. And so I started to write little profiles and sometimes longer ones about these artists. The first one I did was on Cho Bong Ling, the ceramic artist from Republic of China, Taiwan, when she was at the Bray. And it apparently, although I never saw the magazine, appeared in a journal in Taipei, translated into Chinese. But the second piece was on somebody you also probably all know, and that is Robert Harrison, the sculptor from Helena. And Robert and I had many long talks about his ideas about his work. And so we decided, yeah, I will write a piece, a fairly long piece about his work. And he was exploring ideas that weren't so common in the ceramic world at that point. Maybe more in the larger, broader art world, but not so much in clay. And so we decided, why, let's go for broke. Let's approach American Ceramics in New York and see if they have any interest. So we sent it uninvited, and they not only took it, but they put Robert's work on the cover of the issues. So we were, it was a good start. And Robert is somebody that well, very dear friend. So I have written about his work over the years in, I think, 5 different venues. And there's a long essay kind of bringing all that work together in the book. But yes, after that, I just continued to write, and I started developing a relationship with Janet Mansfield at Ceramic Arts and Perception before you, Elaine. And so for a number of years, I wrote pretty regularly for Ceramics Art and Perception. The first piece, I believe, was in '92, and that was on Akio Takamori's work, who is and remains, despite his passing, one of my great heroes in the ceramic world, and just a lovely man. And I would later write another piece on Akio about his graphic art, his printmaking, primarily for American ceramics. And then at a certain point, I was contacted, I believe, by American Craft, and I sort of became, in the 2000s, kind of their Montana stringer. So I did feature stories on Beth Lowe and Tamarpan for them, and a number of other artists. So it was it was all quite gratifying. And of course, just to be clear, this as a freelance writer working primarily as an editor and publisher, this was just kind of a side thing. As you know, we do not get wealthy writing about ceramics. And so I just wanted to say that back to Montana and the local, that, you know, as I said, I was trained as a poet with Richard Hugo and Madeline DeFries at the University of Montana. And I got involved in some literary publishing pretty early on, doing a literary journal in Montana. And I became, shall we say, dissatisfied with the level of innovation in the writing world there. And I started doing some sometimes provocative writing, kind of trying to push people to do more innovative work. And I think that what happened for me in encountering the Bray and the artists at the Bray was that in Montana, here were artists who were doing exactly what I had hoped would happen with the literary world. So I felt like I had come home, in a sense, in terms of kind of the ideas that they were grappling with. And remember, these were, for the most part, you know, artists very early in their careers. That's generally when people come to the Bray. And I know that Akio, for example, always said that he really didn't develop his own voice, his own vision until those years. And he spent several years at the Bray. It was very formative for him, and I think it was for many people. So it was a rich period. And so I guess that's the kind of the key point for me, is that I had a kind of utopian, and silly perhaps, but utopian idea of what Montana culture more broadly could become. There's been a recent study of the rise of modernism in Montana by a scholar, Michelle Coriel, at the University of or at MSU, and basically there was this tyranny of Western art, and most prominently the work of Charlie Russell, that really kind of pushed other kinds of art aside. And there wasn't much of an audience even in the 60s, 70s, and 80s until the 80s for contemporary art. And so I think a number of us in Montana were doing everything we could to kind of make a space for contemporary art and for new ideas. And so I think that that's part of what I devoted my life to, in a sense, was trying to do that. And a lot of it had to do with the kind of the literary side of things. But then I started writing about painters and sculptors in non-ceramic areas as well. And so I have done a lot of work there, which also, for the most part, appears in the book. Um, the There's a section in the book called Global Ceramics, or ceramic globalism. And at a certain point, because I was writing a number of essays for these journals, I started getting some calls to do pieces for catalogs and for primarily for catalogs at Northern Clay Center, Ceramic Research Center at Arizona State, galleries including Natsulis at Davis, and often those had nothing to do with Montana, and that was kind of liberating in a sense, and really stretched me in terms of the kind of research then I began to do to understand work that I had really never encountered. For example, at Northern Clay Center, I wrote a catalog on the kind of the role and history of perforation in ceramics, and which was quite a delightful little project. And I did write a piece on ceramic funk for Peter Held at the Arizona Ceramic Research Center, which I'm not sure if that holds up at this point, but maybe Nancy Service could tell me that. But in any case, what ultimately happened, and this for me was the crowning moment in my ceramic writing life, was that I was approached by American Craft to write a review of a show of Stephen de Stabler's pieces at the Holter Museum of Art in Helena. And so I did that. And then that essay kind of changed and became a catalog for a gallery in Chicago for Stephen's work. And then ultimately the San Jose Museum asked me to write a monographic essay on Stephen's work for the forthcoming show that they were planning. Unfortunately, for the curator there, she was let go from the museum. And so the project traveled then across and to the de Young, and where it ultimately came into fruition, as you, I'm sure, all know. And so I was very honored to be included in that catalog, along with Dory Ashton and Tim Anglin Burgard, who did beautiful work for that as well. But for me, I realized that to some extent, all this writing about ceramics had to do with notions of not only beauty, but just the materiality of the world, and in that sense was a spiritual thing for me. Well, in engaging with Stephen's work, it was one of the great spiritual experiences of my life, I would say. And I spent a good week interviewing him there were also many other excellent interviews that I was able to draw upon. But being in his presence, even as he struggled with his illness, was just unparalleled in my experience and very beautiful. What a great man. And so I
Rick, let me interrupt you. Just, do you mind if people interject with questions?
no, not at all. I love it.
Okay. Okay, good.
Okay. Yeah. Um, so I would say that in some ways I feel like I'm a bit of a imposter amongst you all because I I actually haven't done much ceramic writing since the late like 2009 or so, because I was doing a major monograph about the sculptor and painter Theodore Waddell, who was an important Montana, Idaho artist, and also I edited a bunch of several anthologies on Montana literature, and was publishing an online journal of Montana arts and culture called Drumlum and Views. So I just didn't find the time. So I I'm sorry about that. But now that I'm in San Francisco, I had decided that I would no longer do art writing, that I wanted to focus entirely on my own creative projects. However, now that I'm here and in a new terrain and everything, and I saw that the journal Square Cylinder is coming back online and that, I don't know, I'm kind of tempted to think about that again. So anyway, I would be happy to take any questions at this point and just see if I can fill in anything or add anything at this moment. Yeah.
I have a couple thoughts. Um,
Okay.
and you know, when you after I got your book, thank you so much. I was reading the essay on Tom Rippon, who I think was kind of a link between Northern California and Montana, right? Because
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, he was a Sacramentan, the nephew of Ruth Rippon, and taught in Montana, and then that brings me back to how you came to the title of this volume. I loved the title, Regionalism That Travels, because for me that invokes the idea of you're getting to the core of thought, but on a broader plane. And was there a big discussion about that? And I liked your, allusion to Lucy Lippard and her quote about that. But was that did that just kind of appear as a summarizing concept for this volume, or did you have to really noodle it around? I think it's so great.
Well, um, the it was an idea that I had been working with for some years, and I actually put together a talk probably in the early 2000s called with that title, Region
Oh,
That Travels, and it's earlier in the book, and it has to do entirely with literature, and um, and just the notion of a broader world, despite we're focusing on a place, but there are all, and it's kind of related to James Clifford, the ethnologist from Santa Cruz, his work about kind of cosmopolitan regional people. So because of I mean, he says so much of a place involves the travels with and contacts with others. And so that's kind of he provided the kernel for that for me. And I love that. And so I just kind of ended up making that. But it seems to me that the Bray and the Montana ceramic community in particular is a perfect example of that. And, part of my effort, as I was saying, of kind of combating the kind of Western art ethos had to do with, again, making space for these other kinds of arts. And that's really happened. But I'm sorry to say that I served on the Governor's Awards for the Arts panel a couple of years ago with a new governor. And the governor's representative on the panel said point blank, the governor's really only interested in work that comes out of ranching, farming people and communities. And none of this modern shit, pardon my French, is, and it was very clear that that was the case. And I think it's just gotten more so. And of course, now the NEA is getting gutted and, it's all so horrible. But that doesn't mean that all the progress that's been made in terms of the infrastructure and just the communities of artists is going away. It's just that we will all struggle on our own, in a sense, to thrive and prosper, which I hope we all do. Yeah.
So Rick, you mentioned a lot of different venues for your writing, some and to review, another to do a catalog. How does your approach to writing the article or essay vary depending upon that focus?
That's a very good question. I generally take the same approach, and usually there's not too much editorial direction, beyond word count. And what happens with that, of course, is that at a certain point, say a new editor comes to American Craft, and suddenly they're not calling me anymore because my style is not theirs. And but let me say this about my approach. I am not a trained art historian. I am, I'm a literary person. And so I think I can bring some different things to bear in terms of working with thematic material, et cetera. But I am the scholar, literary scholar, Guy Davenport, talks about what he calls advocacy criticism. And I am more in that, especially in the visual arts realm, not so much I'm much more critical in the literary field, but I am always learning, in a sense, by doing all of these interviews. And Nancy, I was so inspired by all in your event, 2001, just all the work you have done to document all these folks. And so I'm just trying to explain in an artful way what these people are trying to do. And of course, some critics would say that is a kind of intellectual weakness. You're not, taking you're not being a real critic. But since I'm an amateur and kind of outside everything, I can just not worry about that. And of course, if someone doesn't like that approach, then obviously they won't use me. So,
well, the last thing I would call you is an amateur.
And if I could pipe in with a question, first of all, I want to thank you so much. Your talk is very thoughtful, And you actually were very helpful to me, just from reading your work when I was headed as the Gentile critic in 2019. And I read
Oh,
the history about the Bray. And then later on, your writing on Rebecca Hutchinson, I found wonderful. And I recently did a catalog or one of the essays in the Everson's catalog about her. And I'll
oh,
or send
yeah,
it.
that
It,
catalog. I love that.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I would just say, I'm finally happy to put a face to the name and to hear what you're talking about, the poetry, the literature, the thoughtfulness. I guess my questions would fall into, well, sort of more observations on, you're talking about a 40-year trajectory from the 90s to now of being in this field in the way you are, what you're seeing in terms of evolutionary trends in writing, and what do you read, or what could you direct us to either read, or have you switched to podcasts in addition, whether it's literature or just, yeah, what do you think is worth the time these days?
Oh my goodness. Well, I must confess I've become more conservative about media than forward looking. So, I'm not listening to podcasts. I know there's a whole world out there that I'm just not engaging with. So I guess I can say I can do that, but
Of
I,
course, I'll
I,
just switch to the writing part.
yeah.
Train our eyes.
And so, I mean, I'm mostly reading ancient Chinese poetry these days, and and that's feeding my soul for sure. And but in terms of the craft world, uh, there's so much good writing coming out in these catalogs, and I so appreciate everyone who's, doing this work. I'm thrilled that you were participated in Rebecca's in her catalog. It's a lovely catalog and amazing work. Um, but I don't really have a lot of tips. Oh, excuse me, I'm going to turn this off. I don't have a lot of tips because I'm kind of checked out from that world in a sense. And I'm sorry to say that, but yeah, that's certainly the case. By the way, I just wanted to mention, I believe this is true. I wrote the very first catalog for the Bray for that program.
The Writer
For
in Residence program.
Yeah, Jason Walker and Sandra Trujillo, way back when, and that was before they were doing the linking with Gentile. I just did it, but I'm so happy that it has continued. Yeah.
Thank you. I'll turn my attention to ancient Chinese poetry for your.
Yeah.
Nancy?
Rick, I'm curious to know how your interviews and conversations with Stephen DeStabler, this is a really big question,
Okay.
how that motivated your work or impacted your writing about him, having interviewed him quite a bit and being under that spell in a sense where I used to say that I'd go to Stephen's house. I didn't have a recorder at that time. I'd go to Stephen's house with my list of questions, none of which were specifically answered, but we kind of went on this philosophical journey, which had touchstones. And then I look back and I'm like, oh, we covered all that information. And I'm just wondering how, because again, that was one of the most rewarding episodes of my life, and actually inspired me even more to be a documentarian, to really hear what artists are saying. Sometimes I think the critic's lens misses some really important information. So I just wanted to hear from you how that experience impacted your writing about him and perhaps expanded your thinking of the field.
Yeah. Ooh.
Yeah.
Well, yes, it is a large question. was he's such a soulful
Yeah.
and philosophically complex person, and so articulate and so well read. Um, how could you not learn so much, as you say, in just speaking with him? And I felt, I will say that, he was not doing all that well when I was interviewing him. And so sometimes it was hard. But, and of course, we were all fortunate that Ramsey Breslin did that long interview with him over years, I think, that is at the Archives of American Art. But, I just, I don't know. Here's again, it comes back to poetry. I have been struggling for years to write a poem for Stephen, and I have not yet succeeded. And funnily, today I was just looking at that essay again, and what came to me was his undergraduate thesis at Princeton on St. Francis. I think that I now have a way into this poem, reading his writing as a young man, maybe 20 something, on St. Francis. It's just really quite profound. And, I have not, all these ceramic artists that I've interviewed are wonderfully articulate and have all kinds of great ideas, but no one, and I just say this kind of with humility, no one came close in terms of that soulfulness. And so I just cherish that experience. And I've interviewed Rudy Audio a couple of times, and that was a kind of magical experience. But it was wonderful to see how his thinking had changed over the years. But it wasn't the same kind of soulfulness, but it was a great experience as well, or interviewing Francis Senska when Cher and I were writing that essay, to just have that opportunity to speak with these founders really of this whole tradition. I don't know. I don't think I answered your question, but.
Well, I think it was almost an impossible question.
Right.
But I was curious. So.
Yeah.
Rick, I have a question, probably more procedural than philosophical, but you mentioned that square cylinder is coming back, and by that mention, I'm assuming that you have written for platforms on the internet, and I just wanted to hear your thoughts about the difference, the way that you approach writing for these internet platforms, like maybe art sources delivered to my email, and I know Matthew Kangas and several others write for visual art sources, and I really appreciate seeing it come through, and make time to read the articles that that spark my interest.
Mm-hmm.
But what is your feeling about writing for paper, where I know there's much more strictness in word count, and also the way in which images are sourced, and then writing for a platform like Square Cylinder?
Right. I haven't done a lot for online, but I do read them, and I had really appreciated Square Cylinder under the previous editor's domain, and it seemed like he was able to get, even though the word counts were, to my mind, too short, I thought that however he worked with his writers, they did a wonderful job, and for the most part, and I was impressed by that. And it sounds like the new editors have great plans for expanding the offerings on the site, and that's all I can say. I don't know, beyond that, they're really gearing up to make it even better. I know the Brooklyn Rail does some online stuff, etc. But personally, it was hard to stick to the word counts for American Craft or journals like that, just because one has so much to say. It's a great discipline to write to those word counts, but I still believe in print, and so. But I can see if I were to do it that one would give into this new discipline, essentially, where you would compress even further, but still try to make it intelligible and lucid and all those good things. So.
But did you ever submit your ideas to any of the internet platforms or publications, or did the editors come to you and assign you certain reviews that they wanted to have covered?
I approached them with ideas. Yeah.
And they were receptive to that?
Not so much. I didn't do a lot of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hey,
How
Rick,
about you?
I had a question, Rick. You talked about how to make a space when you were talking about Montana. What was happening in Montana? How to make a space for that. There's a group of us in Santa Fe that are trying to bring contemporary ceramics to the front, to the degree probably never equal, and are not trying to equal what's happening with the native ceramic.
Sure.
But I wonder if you have strategies when you talk about how to make a space in a community or a state or whatever. What strategies do you employ to try and make that happen?
Well, it's kind of a all hands on deck effort, whether it's the curators at local contemporary art museums, find maybe a gallery or two that begins to really get behind contemporary work, writing about those artists, but not just in the national or international journals, but also in local media, if you can find even a weekly or something. I know that sometimes when I would publish an article about a Montana artist in ceramics art and perception, for example, I would ask this local weekly to run it in their pages. And because I'm a real localist, so I wanted local people to know about their local artists. So those are just some thoughts, and it really, of course, Montana had such a deep tradition since '51 that it had been building for some time. And but I wish you all the best with that. I think it's an important thing to do, and I'm glad you're doing it. Yeah.
All right. Thank you for your talk also. That was very nice.
Thank you. Well, if that's everything, I just wanted to thank you again. And I wondered if there was any chance that I could possibly join this group on a regular basis.
Yes, I can put your name on the list. And that brings me to what we're hoping to do next month. This month is our 5-year anniversary of this group.
Wow, that's impressive.
And I'm turning 80 in August, and I'm looking to pass this on to somebody. So next month, I would like to have us discuss that, see where we go from here. And just for those of you who weren't involved at the beginning, this came out, I did an MA in English at the University of Wyoming, and this came out of my thesis, which was comparing ceramic art criticism to fine art criticism, and doing it in a quantitative way.
Mhm.
And actually, Glenn Adamson was on my committee,
Oh,
thankfully. But
wow.
so after a while, there were some actually people here who did presentations without pay. And then later, people just started sending me money, which is about at its end now.
Mm.
And so I'm just really looking, I'm ready to pass it on to somebody. I think I'm past my sell-by date.
Oh, no.
I don't think
I'm
that'll
not,
ever
I'm,
happen, Elaine.
I'm not, no,
No.
I'm not serious about that because I have a lot of other things on my plate that take a lot of time. And so I'm ready to pass it on. I want someone who has the contacts that I have had, and those are international. And I'd love to have your thoughts next month if you're interested in helping me to put something together. So I'm happy to add you to the list.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll look forward to that.
Great. Yeah. So be thinking about this. Dara, there you are. Any comments?
It's a it's an interesting idea. I have a lot on my plate with yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of things going on, but it is interesting. It is intriguing to me. Yeah.
Yeah. And so many directions it could take now that I mean, I heard of a couple different publications here today. To have those editors come on would be a great idea. Nancy, you would be another interesting person to take this on, or two of you to take it on together, or and I'll continue as long as I can. You know, I am just out pretty much almost out of money, but I'm not saying that so people start sending me money. Okay. But I do think that we need to be paying our speakers, and so we'll have that discussion next month. I'll send something out to everybody. Okay.
And
So
Elaine, you mentioned your international contacts. Would it be possible? I know that because of the time zones, it's always tough, but would any of those people possibly be on our discussion to give us, sort of their views of how we can expand this critical conversation to, well, other like-minded people in different countries, especially English-speaking countries? I don't think it's so easy for, other people who speak different languages.
yeah, I think that's a good point. And I will, when I send out that invitation for next month, I'll go into that a little bit. But time zones are difficult. You know, we've
Yeah.
had the woman from Benyamini in Tel Aviv, and they come, but it's midnight there. And in Australia, I know that Janet DeBoos watches the YouTube when she gets it. So that's happening, and it might not mean that they're involved in the conversation, but they can look at what's been happening. So I don't know. We'll see. We just have to see what's going to happen. Did I answer your question?
Yes, and thank you for all your 5 years of dedicated service. It's a long time to maintain
Yeah.
any kind of site, regardless if it's,
Right.
media or print.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
the critical pandemic, years, it seems to have kept our brains and minds and art alive in this format.
Yeah.
Very appreciated.
And it's funny because when I was scheduled in April of 2020 to defend my thesis in Laramie, and COVID hit, so it had to be on Zoom. Well, I had done 90% of my essay, my thesis and everything, or my whole course work on Zoom. We met 3 hours a week on Zoom. And so I was well versed in Zoom. And then, and then we wouldn't have this group if it weren't for the pandemic, because when it had to go on Zoom, I was able to invite people from all over the world who were interested in criticism and critical writing. And so people from Australia, New Zealand, Europe, America came. There were about 25 people. And then about a week later, I started getting emails saying, let's keep this conversation going. And that's how this started. And we decided once a month was enough. And we would just have people that we could talk with, artists whose work has been written about a lot, who have said, I've asked them to talk about how their work was written about. And so anyway, it's been a good run. And I certainly would mentor anybody who would want to take it on. Thank you so much, Rick. Good to
Oh,
see
you,
you.
my pleasure. Yes, thank
Yeah, yeah. And many of us have left our hearts in San Francisco. So, and this is a funny aside, but I grew up in Southern California, and I had an uncle who lived in San Francisco, just below the cross, and he had a boat, and it was back when Alcatraz was actually a prison.
Mhm.
So it was in the 50s. So he would love to take the boat right up into to the buoy. And then he would say, now watch the guards run to the perimeter. And then he'd pull away.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah. Well, thank you, everybody. And thank you so much, Rick. Check
Thank
it.
you.
No, thank you.
Yeah.
All right. I'll be in touch. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.